Hi, my name is Professor Kylie O'Brien, and I'm very happy to be presenting at your conference. I'm going to be talking about healthy ageing and whether cannabis might have a role to play. These are my declarations and a quick overview of what we'll be looking at. So what's healthy ageing? Well, the WHO defines it as a process developing and maintaining functional ability that enables well-being in older age. Other definitions of successful ageing are that there's high physical, psychological and social functioning in old age without major diseases associated with longevity and the absence of disease and disability. There was a study that did a meta-analysis of correlates of successful ageing and came up with 4 main domains, and I've listed those there. Avoiding disease and disability, you see that one coming up again. Having high cognitive, mental and physical function. Now, in Australia, we're not particularly healthy. The leading causes of death in Australia in 2020, for men, it was coronary heart disease, followed by dementia and so on. In women, the top one was dementia, including Alzheimer's disease. Coronary heart disease was second, and so on there as well. Now, according to the WHO, more than 20% of adults aged 16 over suffer from a mental or neurological disorder, and the most common ones in this age group are depression, dementia and anxiety. So when we look at how we age in a healthy manner, we have to look at what I call the pillars of health. So these are, I guess, factors that can contribute to good health. So reduced stress level, good diet and nutrition, adequate sleep, adequate physical activity and adequate vitamin D level, getting out in the sunshine. If any of these factors are deficient, it can contribute to poor physical and or mental health, and these factors can interact too. Now, when we look at addressing illness, then I think an integrative approach is one of the best ways. An integrative approach basically combines the best of orthodox medicine and evidence-based forms of complementary medicine, as well as nutritional and lifestyle approaches and environmental approaches as well. But certainly an integrative approach to health needs to address these pillars of health. And I do think that cannabis may have a role to play in an integrative approach to addressing illness. So let's have a look now at some of the evidence that cannabis can help address some illnesses associated with older populations. Now, we have an endocannabinoid system within our body, and it's one of the most important neuroregulatory systems responsible for homeostasis of most bodily systems. Now, it does also modulate the physiological processes associated with aging. The good thing about the endocannabinoid system is essentially we have a ready-made system with which components of cannabis are able to interact as well. So here's just some of the things that the endocannabinoid system modulates. And you can see there that many of these are relevant to older populations, like pain and analgesia and inflammation and stress and sleep and so on. Now, the plant cannabis has got over 540 secondary metabolites. Over 120 of those are phytocannabinoids, and you often only hear about the main ones: THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, and cannabidiol. These are the most well-researched, but there are many others. And there's over 200 terpenes. These are the essential oils that give cannabis its characteristic smell. They've got therapeutic effects as well, but these terpenes are not unique to cannabis. Many plants have them. And of course, there's other plant nutrients, and they've all got therapeutic benefits too. THC, I've listed some of the therapeutic actions over there on the left-hand side. And again, you can see that there's the potential to address inflammation here, which underpins chronic illness. For example, THC has anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effects. It's neuroprotective, and it has some anti-cancer effects as well. It mimics our own endocannabinoids, anandamide and 2-AG. It's actually a partial agonist at our cannabinoid receptors, which we find in our brain and all parts of our body. And mimicking anandamide in particular, I guess, underlies many of THC's activities, including its action as an analgesic. Cannabidiol works in a slightly different way. It has lower affinity for the cannabinoid receptors within our bodies, and it probably works through other receptor targets instead. But again, we can see it's got the potential to address inflammation again, which underpins chronic illness. So it has anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effects, neuroprotective effects, anti-cancer effects, and so on. It's an anxiolytic as well. And here's just some of the research evidence that cannabidiol could be useful for the treatment symptom relief of many different conditions. The ones in green I've highlighted there, just to some that could be particularly relevant for older populations. Now, if we jump into the what scientific evidence there is that cannabis might be useful in chronic pain, I've just listed some of the many systematic reviews in the literature. And a systematic review is basically where they pool the results from randomised controlled trials and come up with an overall summary of whether they think something works or not. And we can see here from these randomised controlled trials here that most of them here are concluding that cannabis extracts or cannabinoids may be able to provide effective analgesia in a number of different types of pain. Now, of course, evidence is never perfect, and you'll see in that bottom systematic review, 2018, they did sort of note that whilst they found that when you pooled the evidence, all cannabis medicines at any dose pulled together was superior to placebo for a number of different outcome variables like substantial and moderate pain relief, the quality of the evidence was variable. When we look at the literature around anxiety, we find that there's quite a bit of evidence that cannabidiol is anxiolytic. There's randomised controlled trials which have showed an anxiolytic effect in healthy volunteers and social anxiety disorder patients. There's at least one case study. There's a retrospective case series in a psychiatric hospital where they used CBD in addition to regular medication. They found that that was useful for anxiety, and at least 3 regional brain flow studies as well. Now, if we look at the evidence in the literature around depression and cannabis, certainly surveys show that depression is one of the common reasons for using cannabis, along with anxiety and chronic pain. Now, there is preclinical evidence in animal models of an antidepressant effect for CBD and THC, but in the case of THC, there's, as I said, some evidence that's actually negative. So in one study, for example, they found that chronic THC administration in adolescent rats induced depressive-like behaviour, impaired short-term memory, and reduced social interactions within adult rats. So again, as I said, not all the results in the research are positive. There's probably less clinical evidence around cannabis and its components in treating depression compared to anxiety. There's a couple of case studies in the literature that I've listed there. There's an observational study where they looked at a bit over 1,800 people that were using cannabis flower to treat depression. In that study, they were rating their responses using an app. Now, 96% of users reported symptom relief after cannabis consumption, with a mean symptom intensity reduction of nearly 4 points on a visual analog scale that went from -10 to +10. There was a double-blind randomised controlled study that was published in 2017, and it was looking at the effects of oral THC on emotional responses to an acute psychosocial stress, and that was in healthy volunteers. Now, when they looked at the effect of THC before the task, they found that a higher dose of THC increased depression, anxiety, and confusion before the tasks. And when they looked at the effect of THC on task responses, they found that the higher dose of THC increased subjective distress, depression, anxiety, whereas the low dose of THC actually attenuated the self-reported negative effects of a psychosocial stressor. So I think this is an area which requires more research. Now, we know that the endocannabinoid system is involved in the pathophysiology of Alzheimer's disease, and so it might be an important therapeutic target for the future. Preclinical research suggests that several components of cannabis, like cannabidiol, can address the underlying pathophysiology of Alzheimer's. And medicinal cannabis has been found to have the potential to alleviate the neuropsychiatric or behavioural symptoms and signs associated with Alzheimer's, like anxiety, depression, psychosis, agitation, aggression, insomnia, memory decline, pain, and so on. I've just got one example of a prospective study here, 10 female patients with dementia and severe behavioural problems, where the outcome of using an oral medication combination of CBD and THC was quite positive in a number of different areas, including the nurses finding that nearly all the patients had less rigidity overall, which made washing and transfers easier. And 2 of those 10 women with almost persistent screaming almost stopped doing so completely. Now, nutrition is very important for healthy ageing, and THC and CBD come from the flower component of the cannabis plant, but the hemp seeds are also important. And these are a very good source of nutrition because they contain lots of the goodies that I've listed here, including fatty acids and lignanamides and polyphenols and phenols, protein, various vitamins and minerals, and so on. Now, hemp seeds, due to the various components contained with them, may be useful in the prevention and treatment of many conditions, particularly those underpinned by inflammation. So there's a number of areas of research. A lot of this, of course, is preclinical research, that is in animals and cell lines. It's also good to remember that the hemp seeds have a very good ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids in the region of around 2 to 3 to 1, and that's similar to the Mediterranean and Japanese diets. Here's just a couple of slides here just to show you what types of research are published on hemp seeds. Most of these, as you can see, are preclinical types of studies, either in cell lines or in animals. But there's quite a bit done in the area of cardiovascular disease and also neurodegenerative diseases and others like rheumatoid arthritis and skin conditions. Finally, we're going to look at just some of the small amount of research into cannabis and anti-aging. There was a worm study, and they did this because 60 to 80% of genes are shared with humans. They found whole life exposure to cannabidiol extended the lifespan of the worms up to 18%, and they found that it also increased the late stage life activity up to 206% compared to controls. In one mice study, they injected old female mice aged 24 months with THC, and they found they performed significantly better than the control-treated older mice and performed in a similar manner to the young 2-month-old mice in various aspects of memory and learning. And they looked at various ways that occurred. One of them was that THC was able to increase the level of an enzyme involved in neuroprotection, in neuroplasticity, in various parts of the brain of the older mice. Another mice study showed that low-dose THC reversed the age-related decline in cognitive performance in mice aged 12 and 18 months. So again, they looked at how they did that. One of the mechanisms seemed to be that THC restored the hippocampal gene transcription patterns. So the expression profiles of these older 12-month-old THC-treated mice was very similar to 2-month-old young THC-free mice. Now, the US Department of Health and Human Services obviously think that cannabis might be useful because they've got a patent to use cannabinoids as antioxidants and neuroprotectants to possibly treat certain age-related diseases. So that's interesting. Finally, there is a little bit of research that I found in terms of my studies. It suggests that hemp seeds have also got anti-aging properties. So they set up some mice studies and they found hemp seed was protective against Alzheimer's, improving memory and learning. Now, of course, cannabis is a herb, but there are safety considerations. So cannabis, THC and CBD can have side effects and they can interact with some pharmaceutical medications. In addition, there's a possibility that people taking THC-containing medicines could become addicted to THC or cannabis because cannabis use disorder can occur in some individuals taking medicinal cannabis, not just in the recreational space. Now, in Australia, medicinal cannabis is not considered a first-line therapy. I think the take-home message I want to get across here is that ideally medicinal cannabis should be prescribed by a healthcare practitioner who knows what they're doing. So what do we conclude here? I guess ageing can be associated with a range of illnesses, both physical and mental, and many of these are underpinned by chronic inflammation. So chronic pain, anxiety, depression, dementia, we find that inflammation is involved in the pathophysiology of all of these. The endocannabinoid system is involved in homeostasis of most bodily systems, and that includes the processes involved with ageing. Now, the good thing about cannabis is that the constituents can interact with the components of our own endocannabinoid system. THC and CBD may have many beneficial actions, including being anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, and neuroprotective, that are relevant in relation to conditions that affect older populations. So I think that cannabis can be a useful part of an integrative approach to addressing factors that can impact negatively on health in older people, like stress and anxiety, depression, poor sleep, and that of course can interact with other symptoms like chronic pain and so on. I think that there is a small amount now of preclinical research, at least, that suggests that CBD and THC and even hemp seeds may have anti-aging effects. But I think it's true to say that much more research is needed in the health and longevity space in relation to medicinal cannabis and the various parts of the plant. If you want to learn more about cannabis for healthcare practitioners, there is the International College of Cannabinoid Medicine, an online learning platform which is focused on the evidence base of medicinal cannabis in the treatment of many different conditions. So I invite you to look at the ICCM. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present at your conference.